Since the release of Marvel Rivals, we've seen a bit of a renaissance of the hero shooter that has brought a lot of new people into the genre. With that and the massive changes currently in Overwatch, there's arguably never been a better time to get into hero shooters. If you've come from a different FPS game, you might have noticed that hero shooters are a bit weird and it's not necessarily easy to follow what's going on. There are a lot of guides out there on how to play specific heroes, and those are great for learning how to use your buttons. There are also the occasional guides on things like positioning, but I haven't seen a guide that goes through all the fundamentals of how do hero shooters work and how do you understand why you're winning or losing. So in this guide, I want to fill that gap. I've been playing hero shooters since 2016. I reached Grandmaster in Overwatch, coached a GM Top 500 Open Division team, and I'm currently Celestial in Marvel Rivals. In this guide, I want to summarize all the most important things that I've learned during that time so that you don't have to wait until 2034 to get to the same point. The things I talk about all apply to both Marvel Rivals and Overwatch, so if you're currently playing either of those games, or you're coming from a different game and are wondering if you want to sink your teeth into either one of them, this guide's for you. We'll go through the fundamentals of the game, but fundamentals does not mean basics, and we will still get pretty advanced by the standards of a casual gamer. Hero shooters are different from most traditional shooters. When Overwatch came out, it was often described as tactical shooter meets MOBA, and a lot of that comes down to the question, is the game a mechanics check or a knowledge check? You can think of this as a spectrum. On the pure mechanics side, you have things like Olympic archery. There's knowledge involved there, of course, but once you stand there, there isn't a whole lot of strategy. It's all about, can you hit your shot? On the pure knowledge side, you have something like chess. Unless you're in a coma, you can play chess. And there are probably scientists out there working on playing chess with coma patients. Coming back to video games then, far over on the mechanics side, we have arena shooters like Quake, Unreal Tournament, and your general deathmatch modes. Battle royals like Fortnite or Apex Legends. And then we have tag shooters like CS or Valorant or Rainbow Six that certainly involve a lot of tactics, hence the name, but in the end, it still comes down to, can you hit your shot? And I know Valorant can be described as a hero shooter. When I say hero shooter in this guide, I mean Marvel Rivals and Overwatch. I've never played TF2 or Paladins, but I imagine a lot of things still apply. On the other end, we have games that rely more on game knowledge than mechanics, like most MMOs and MOBAs. Your WoWs, Dotas, League of Legends. Also, if you disagree on any of the placements of any of these games, feel free to have a lengthy discussion in the comments. Marvel Rivals and Overwatch sit somewhere in between. And I say somewhere here because it depends on the hero you play. Damage heroes are more of a mechanics check, while tanks are more of a knowledge check. The old Overwatch meme, no aim, no brain, Winston Main, had a point on the aim part, at least outside of his ult. However, you still need a lot of game knowledge on any role in order to climb. The number of cheaters we've seen over the years that are stuck in low ranks despite blatantly aimbotting can attest to that, especially when we look at how comparatively easy it is to take over a lobby in a game like Apex when cheating. I mentioned before that hero shooters can be described as tag shooters meets MOBA. They borrow a lot of their controls from tag shooters, and they certainly look more like a tag shooter than a MOBA, but for the purpose of understanding them, I think it's more useful to look at them as a MOBA. In CS, for example, you can turn a corner and one-tap someone with an AK, and while suddenly bursting someone in a hero shooter can and does happen, the game's not designed around it, and just relying on your mechanics is not going to get you very far. At their core, hero shooters are about objectives and resource trades. Your objectives are generally either a point you want to capture or defend, or a payload you want to push or stop. That is what the game is about. Killing the other team is helpful, but not the goal, and it's not uncommon for the team with more kills to lose. You can think of the game as a fortress that you want to capture. In the center, there is your objective progress. All the fortifications are the resources the other team has that you need to get past in order to get there. The inner wall is the enemy's health. Once that's zero, the enemy team dies. But before you can kill them, you need to get past all the resources that make up their outer walls. This is where thinking of the game as a MOBA comes in handy. Your goal when a fight begins is not to kill the other team, unless you can, of course. Your goal is to get favorable resource trades so that they run out of resources before you do, and then they die. Hero shooters also share the respawn mechanics with MOBAs, which other shooters usually don't. So this is what the bulk of this guide's about. What resources do we have, and how can I trade resources? So with all that being said, what are all the important resources that we have to work with? The first and most important resource is objective progress. There are two main things that I want to discuss here. The first are checkpoints. Checkpoints are usually positioned in a way that fighting right on or next to them gives an advantage to the defending team through a mix of favorable positioning and closer respawn points. Reaching a checkpoint also means the attacking team can't lose the progress they've gained. So as an attacker, it can therefore be a good idea to commit a few more resources than necessary just to make sure you reach that checkpoint. The second thing I want to discuss is capture speed. In both Rivals and Overwatch, you can capture an objective with up to 3 players. The first player will add the most capture speed, with the second player less than the first, the third less than the second, and the fourth player not adding any speed at all. This means that when trying to capture an objective as quickly as possible, you should have 3 players on it. However, oftentimes players have better things to do than add a little bit of progress, like for example taking space. So only having 1 player on the objective is often the best thing to do. One difference between the games is that for pushing payloads, Overwatch requires you to have a player on the payload, while payloads in Rivals push themselves. This means Rivals players can position a lot more freely than Overwatch players. Having 1 player on the payload in Rivals still adds a lot of speed though, so having at least 1 player on it by default is still a good idea. Let's look at an example from a game. We're in defense, which means the enemy team wants to push the cart through the streets, and my team wants to stop it. I'm on cap, but let's ignore that for a minute and look at the rest of my team. The majority of my team is located on the high ground, which is good. It gives them an advantage. But it means they can't contest the cart until it's around here and they drop from high ground. Let's now say we lose the first fight. This means we will probably fall back at some point in search for cover, and the cart will push up to around here by the time we actually die. So at that point, we respawn and walk back, and the enemy team can use that time to push the cart around the corner in the direction of the checkpoint, and the cart will probably be around here by the time we can recontest and fight again. Now the checkpoint is right here, so if we lose that fight too, the enemy will get the checkpoint. So after 2 fights, they will have the checkpoint that they want. Going back to the beginning, let's say we still lose the first fight, but we keep the cart from pushing beyond around this area. This means by the time we come back from for a second fight, the cart will only be around here. So if we still lose that fight, the enemy team isn't close to the checkpoint. They still have to push all the way around the corner. And there is a good chance that we can recontest for a third fight before they get the checkpoint. So instead of having 2 fights to keep them from gaining the checkpoint, we have 3. So by stalling the cart during the team fight and preventing the enemy team from getting free progress, we can increase our chances of stopping them by 50%. So that is exactly what I'm doing. I jump onto the cart, let my team attack from range, and do my best to prevent cart progress while still pressuring their backline. I obviously still want to win, but if we lose, I want to make sure that their win is worth as little as possible. Health as a resource for Rivals is a bit simpler than Overwatch. Overwatch has shields which automatically regenerate, and armor which gives you damage reduction. Keeping your armored targets, mainly tanks, from dropping below their armor range means it's easier to keep them up, and conversely, having your tanks drop to low HP can snowball. Your shields can also be used to give your support some time to breathe by not having to heal you. By comparison, health in Rivals is just health. One thing to keep in mind is that the attitude, the only health point that matters is the last one, is funny, but not necessarily true. Your health acts a bit like a meter on how much time you have for an engagement or how much risk you can take. Conversely, you don't always have to kill a player in order to have done enough damage to them. Let's say your backline in Rivals is bullied by a Spider-Man. A good Spider-Man is very hard to kill through his movement, but at low health he can still just die from a random shot at any time. This means if you wait for his engages and deal enough damage to scare him away and force him to get a health pack rather than fight, you effectively turned the game into a 5v6 almost as much as if you killed him. Dealing damage is less about getting kills and more about keeping your opponent from doing things. Killing them is the best way to do that, but it's not the only one. That being said, deaths are arguably the most important stat on the scoreboard. When you're dead, you can't do anything. So the most widely applicable advice for how to improve is figure out why you're dying and die less. Your primary fire and non-cooldown abilities are the main thing that you do in between your cooldowns. The main purpose of these is to apply pressure to force the enemies to use resources in order to do things. Because these are an infinite resource, outside of reload times, which are a resource you need to manage, they are your main tool for getting favorable resource trades. You won't get kills by only using primary fire unless you also use other resources or the enemy makes a mistake, but it's great for making sure that the other team gets nothing for free. Not much more to be said here because the details are so different from hero to hero, so let's move on to cooldowns. Your cooldowns are also very different from hero to hero, so the details again depend a lot on the hero you play. One distinction I want to draw attention to is between proactive and reactive cooldowns. Proactive cooldowns are used to start a trade. Reactive cooldowns are used to prevent you from losing too many resources to something that is already happening. It isn't that some cooldowns are proactive and some are reactive, but that you can basically use any cooldown both proactively and reactively. For example, Mantis Asleep can incapacitate an enemy for a few seconds. You can use it reactively by sleeping an enemy that is attacking you, by peeling an enemy that is pressuring your teammates, or by interrupting an enemy ultimate. You can also use it proactively by keeping an enemy from moving to line up a headshot and set up a kill. You can sleep a tank to drop their shield so you can hit their teammates, or you can slow an opponent so they can't contest the objective. There are so many creative ways to use any abilities, and if you want to get better at a hero, take one of their abilities and imagine new scenarios of how you can use it proactively or reactively. This way, you'll be better able to use it when the scenario arises in game. The last point I want to make on cooldowns are times where it is better not to use a cooldown because the passive threat of having it is better than using it and not accomplishing much. One example are hook abilities like Bucky or Roadhog. These hooks are great for targeting players who are slightly out of position and displacing them into a spot where they either die or have to use considerable resources to survive. In this case, just having the hook off cooldown can pressure the other team into playing more passively and achieving less through it. And using the hook in a situation that is unlikely to work can give the other team the room to push in more aggressively. So pay attention if the enemy changes their play based on the cooldowns you use. Maybe you're on Luna and you notice that the enemy Panther waits for you to use your freeze to dive you. Maybe you're on Magneto and you notice that the enemy Wolverine waits for your bubble before he kidnaps you. These situations are less likely in lower ranks, but they will definitely occur once you climb. Ultimates are the strongest abilities in the game. Well, technically there are some cooldowns that are stronger than some ultimates, but as a whole, ultimates are the strongest abilities in the game. That often makes them the most important resource for deciding the outcome of a fight, and there are a few concepts around ultimates that I want to go over. The first one is the ult combo. This is when you combine your ultimate with a different ultimate or ability that complements your ult. A classic example from Overwatch is the Nano Blade. Genji's ultimate gives him a powerful melee attack, but he's pretty squishy during it. Ana's Nano Boost increases damage dealt and reduces damage received, so combining the two ults removes the squishiness and changes breakpoints that make it much easier to kill opponents. One ult combo from Rivals is Groot Moon Knight. Groot's ult immobilizes opponents but doesn't deal a lot of damage. Moon Knight's ult deals a lot of AoE damage, but enemies can just move out of it. So combining the two ults almost guarantees kills. An example of comboing an ult with an ability is Scarlet Witch and Magneto. Scarlet Witch's ult deals a lot of AoE damage, but it has a charge up time during which she can be killed. So Magneto's bubble improves her survivability by a lot, which allows her to go for more aggressive plays. The second ult concept I want to discuss is called layering. The simplest ult fight you can have is when you use an ult and it wins you the fight. Layering is when Team 1 uses an ult, Team 2 responds with a second ult, Team 1 responds with a third ult, and so on until a team runs out of ults or until one ult decides the fight. Let's look at an example from an old Overwatch meta called GOATs, which is 3 tanks and 3 supports. This is an old meta, but I use it here because it exemplifies 2 things very well. Ult layering and a hero shooter situation commonly known as I have no idea what's happening. When both teams in Overwatch or rivals start using abilities and ultimates, it can lead to a lot of visual clutter that makes it difficult to follow the fight by just looking at your screen. We will primarily look at the team overview at the top where we see the characters, their health, and more importantly, their ultimate charge and their ultimates. The way you do this in-game is by focusing on audio cues and following who's ulting by listening where the ult voice lines are coming from. So we have the Titans on attack and the Shock on defense. The Titans go in. They don't pop an ult immediately. Once the team fight starts and the Titans start taking a bit of damage, Huxel uses his rally, which is a defensive ult that allows them to sustain the fight. Shock wants to counter with their own rally, but they don't have it yet, so they disengage, give Titans a tick on the point, and farm their own rally, and as soon as they have rally, they re-engage with it. And at this point, Titans' rally is about to run out, so they disengage again, so they give space, which is something that we'll talk about in a bit. After Shock are out of their cover, the Titans re-engage with a Shatter from Bumper, which is an ult that stuns people. Shock want to counter with a Transcendence from Violet, which is an AoE ult that has massive AoE healing, but Violet is stunned and can't ult. So, since Violet is about to die, Super sacrifices himself so that Violet can live and ult and allow the Shock to sustain. Meanwhile, Sinatra used his Graviton and Twilight uses his Transcendence to counter that. Graviton is an offensive ult that pulls people together, which makes it easier to kill them. As Sinatra's Graviton runs out, Sumin Su tries to change the aggression by ulting the Shock, while Violet's Transcendent is still going, but it is about to run out, so Moth uses his Beat, which is another defensive ult that gives his whole team more health, to live through Sumin Su's Grav. So they live through the Grav, and at this point Shock wants to re-engage, change the direction of the aggression again, so they try to re-engage with Choi Ho-bin's bomb, which is, well, an ultimate that's an AoE bomb. But Huxel gets his rally again, which he started the fight with, so he pops his rally to out-sustain the fight, and at this point Shock has run out of ultimates, and they die. And as a result, Titans take the point. Understanding layering is important because it can feel like only the last ult did something, when in reality all the previous ults were necessary for setting up that success. The opposite of ult layering is called ult stacking. Ult stacking is when you use multiple ults that do similar things at the same time. But while in an ult combo the ults complement each other, ult stacking means the second ult doesn't offer much over the first. Ult stacking is therefore almost always a mistake because you can't use the second ult at a later point anymore, where it would be much more useful. As an example for ult stacking, let's look at me being a noob. Here we're on attack, I'm on Mantis, and we're about to get ulted by Groot. So, Groot ults us, and I pop my ult together with Luna ult. And this is terrible because Luna ult already gives us a boatload of AoE healing, which is enough to counter the Groot ult. So my ult effectively does nothing and I just wasted it. What I should have done is let Luna ult to counter Groot, wait for Luna's ult to run out, and then layer my ult on top of it so that we can use the AoE healing and speed boost from Mantis ult to engage onto them and take the aggression. That's an example of stacking defensive ults, but you can also stack offensive ults, usually in one of two ways. The first is when the enemy already has a defensive ult going and a second offensive ult is unlikely to get through that. In that case, it's better to wait and layer your second offensive ult when the defensive one runs out. The second way of stacking offensive ults is when the first ult is already enough to win the fight, but you use a second ult anyway. This can be a good idea when you're not sure if the first ult really is enough, but either way it means that you don't have your second ult at a later point. The way to avoid ult stacking is communication. For example, you use your ult first, I'll use mine second, or by observing how your teammates play and adjusting your play accordingly. The third concept are counter ults. This will be short and sweet because a counter ult is basically a mini version of ult layering that we already discussed. Some ults are very good at countering other ults. This especially applies to support ults that allow you to survive through damage or crowd control ults like Bucky or Doctor Strange. When you have an ult that you want to use as a counter, it is important to look at the heroes on the enemy team and decide which ults you want to counter. You should then track when they use their ults and when you expect them to get it back so that you can make sure that you get your ult in time. Let's say you're a support and you're at 90% ult charge and you're pretty sure the enemy has an ult that they will likely use as soon as the teamfight begins. You can then try to get your ult before you engage by poking or by asking your tank to take a bit of damage and let you heal them up before they actually go in. And conversely, if you're the other support and your support partner almost has ult, it might be a good idea to let them heal poke damage before going in so that they have their ults as soon as the real teamfight begins. The final ult concept I want to discuss is called tempo ults. But before we go into that, a general question. How often should you use your ult? On the one hand, the longer you hold it, the higher the likelihood that you can use it in the perfect moment. On the other hand, the more you use it as soon as you get it, the faster you can start building a new ult and the more ults you will have throughout the game. As a rule of thumb, it is better to use your ult too often than not often enough. For one, you don't need your ults to have massive impact as long as it is enough to win the fight. Getting 5 kills with an ultimate is flashy, but getting 1 or 2 kills is often enough to win. But also, the more you use your ults, the more opportunities you will have to decide if an ult was good or bad and learn from it. You don't get better at your ult usage if you don't use your ults. So back to tempo ults. A tempo ult is about keeping your momentum. It means you already have the upper hand because you have won a fight or are winning a fight, and you ult to prevent the other team from bouncing back. Let's look at this example from an Eternity One Above All game with Lawrence on Psylocke. Lawrence's team is pushing the cart and approaching the checkpoint. They kill the defending Psylocke, and shortly after, the defending Mr. Fantastic dies as well. At this point, the attackers are up 6v4 and very likely to win, but the defenders can still keep them from reaching the checkpoint for quite a while, especially with support ults. So to keep them on the defensive, our Psylocke goes in and ults. This ult was probably not necessary for them to win, and it doesn't even get any immediate kills, but it was still very useful because it forces the defenders to go back and use a lot of resources to survive, which they now can't use to contest the point. So because of the Psylocke's ult, the attackers cap the point without losing unnecessary time off the clock. Tempo ults have multiple advantages. First, it keeps the enemy team from bouncing back and keeps them on the back foot, which gives you time, a resource that we will talk about later. Second, it allows you to start building another ult immediately. Third, it allows your teammates who don't have ults to push up more aggressively and build their ults so that they can ult in the next team fight. Fourth, It takes the initiative away from the enemy team, which makes it harder for them to properly set up their plays. Tempo also all about maximizing the overall resources your team has throughout the entire length of the game. So far we've talked about resources that the game tells you have. Now let's talk about resources that are more abstract but just as important. And let's start by talking about space. What is space? What does it mean to have space? And what does it mean to take space? Space is all about threats. It is the question, how safe or dangerous is this area for me? And how safe or dangerous is this area for the other team? Having space means you have the, space to take an advantageous fight. And fighting an enemy in your space means they're more likely to die than you are. There are 3 things you can do with space. You can hold space, take space, or give space. Holding space means you stay where you are and continue to threaten or protect an area. Taking space means you go to an area that is more threatening to you and you make it so that it is more threatening to the enemy. There are 2 ways to take space. You can either make the area safer for your team, or you can make it less safe for the enemy. Successfully taking space usually involves both. Making an area safer for your team is usually more the job of your tanks and supports, while making it less safe for the enemy is usually more the job of your damage heroes. However, the emphasis is on the word more, because every hero can and should do both. Giving space means you give space to your enemy. Space should almost never be given freely unless it is no longer valuable, but it is a useful resource for trades. When your opponent uses resources such as cooldowns to invade your space, you can retreat until their cooldowns run out and they might have moved out of cover to attack you and then re-engage with an advantage. This dynamic leads to a nice push-pull when 2 well-coordinated teams fight. Let's watch these concepts in action. This is another game with multiple top 20 players, and let's start by focusing on how Finzi, the blue team's Doctor Strange, handles space. Space can be divided into 4 parts: blue team space, red team space, contested space, and unused space. The front line is at this choke point. The area on the left is blue space, the area in the right room is red space, and the area around the choke is contested space. Strange is focused on holding this space. He wants to make sure that red team has to use resources to get past him. Multiple red players then use cooldowns to push blue team off the high ground. Strange doesn't want them to have the high ground, so he immediately goes from holding the space at the door to taking back the space on the high ground. Now the front lines have shifted. The high ground has become unused space, so blue team can't shoot the choke from there anymore. This means the area from the choke to the health pack has become red space, and they can use this to walk out and stage an attack on the point. Finzi is back to holding space by trying to push Mr. Fantastic back and keeping the space behind him safe for his team, especially his support. At this point, let's switch our point of view from blue team to red team's Namor and see how he takes space in this engagement. First, he tries to make the point less safe for blue team while his Mr. Fantastic engages by shooting people on point. After Fantastic leaves, Namor realizes he has to be more careful and stay within his space. So he walks back a bit and shoots the other Namor's turrets. This creates space by making the area under the turrets safer for his team. After the turrets are dead, red team has recovered enough resources to engage again, so Namor walks forward. This creates a lot of space, but to understand why, we need to look at the point from above. When Namor was back at the choke, blue team Strange and Magneto could shield him and make everything behind them safe for their team. But because Namor walked over here to shoot from a different direction, suddenly Strange can't shield all attacking players anymore. This makes this back area of the point unsafe and forces blue team to give space and retreat all the way behind this line in an effort to regroup. Now let's move on to one of the most important and most misunderstood topics in FPS games: positioning. Positioning is directly linked to space. Good positioning determines the options for what you can do and how safe you are while doing it. So these are the key parts of positioning: options and safety. If you want to know how good your positioning is, you ask yourself, what are the options this gives me? And how safe am I here? Positioning is arguably the most complex resource you have, so we will have quite a few subtopics to go through. You don't need to be an FPS veteran to know that cover is good, but it is very common for players to not use it correctly or not use it at all. There are basically two types of cover: partial cover and full cover. Partial cover means that parts of your hitbox are covered, but you can still shoot your opponent. Assuming they don't have cover, this means you see more of their hitbox than they see of yours, and it is therefore easier for you to shoot them than it is for them to hit you. Partial cover is effectively just passive damage resistance, and you should look for things to use as partial cover as much as you can. Full cover means you are fully obscured from your opponent. They can't hit you, except for area of effect damage that goes around the corner, and you can't hit them either. Being in full cover is therefore not viable while trying to shoot the other team, but having full cover next to you gives you several powerful options. First, you don't have to run to cover when you're winning, but you have the option to duck and regenerate when you're low or losing a duel. If you don't have a way to retreat to cover, your only option is to win the duel. And as we said earlier, positioning is about options and safety. So if your only option is hit your shots or die, that usually shows poor positioning. The second benefit of full cover is the option to jiggle peek. This generally doesn't apply to heroes with a continuous fire rate, but for heroes with distinct shots, you can stay in cover, peek to take shots, and duck while waiting for your shot to reload. This minimizes the time your hitbox is exposed and can keep some of your hitbox permanently covered, all while having full uptime with your fire rate. The third benefit of full cover is information. You can quickly peek out of cover, get a lay of the land, and duck back before most enemy players are able to react and shoot you. You can also use a third-person camera to look around. For Overwatch, there is no difference between left cover and right cover. This is different from Marvel Rivals because of its permanent third-person view with your character on the left and bullets coming from your character. In Overwatch, if you can put your crosshair on someone, you can shoot them and they can shoot you. In Rivals, when peeking from the right, you can see them before they can see you. When peeking from the left, they can see you before you can see them. This means when playing Rivals, the person peeking from the right has an advantage. Sightlines are directly linked to cover, but I want to call them out directly because they are so important. The ideal sightlines check 3 points. 1, you see the enemy that you want to shoot. 2, you have cover from enemies you're not currently shooting. And 3, you have sightlines to your supports. Let's take the Namor we just looked at last game. Where he is right now gives him fantastic sightlines. He has the tanks in view that he wants to shoot. He has cover from the rest of blue team who he doesn't want to shoot right now. And he is in plain view of his supports. So where else could he be? He could be up here on the high ground. This is a more aggressive angle. It gives him the option to shoot at anyone he wants to shoot, including the enemy's backline, who's potentially a higher value. He is less safe because more people can shoot him, but he can still use cover, and he is still in view for his supports to heal. He could also be where his invisible woman is right now. This means he would stand here, shoot down main, and use the wall as cover from however many people he wants. And he would also be right next to his supports. Finally, he could also be up here on the high ground, use the pillar and the floor as cover from the people he isn't shooting right now, and he is always a maximum of 1 step away from being in view of his supports. Every hero has an effective range where they are the strongest, so you want to position within that range. However, it's not just about a distance where you are strongest, but a distance where the difference between your effective range and your enemy's effective range is the greatest. Let's say you're in Overwatch playing Hanzo. Hanzo shoots arrows that have a travel time and can one-shot a lot of other heroes. Because of the travel time, hitting those arrows becomes more difficult the further away you are from your target. So your effectiveness goes down with range. Widowmaker has a sniper rifle that can also one-shot many other heroes, but it doesn't have a travel time, so her effectiveness is roughly the same at every distance. This means when fighting Widowmaker, you want to be as close as you can given your circumstances. Soldier 76 has a rifle that deals constant damage and has a linear damage fall-off after a certain distance. This means Soldier is strongest at medium ranges, and Hanzo therefore wants to fight him either at close range, where it is easiest to one-shot Soldier, or at long range, where Soldier can't do more than tickle Hanzo. Reaper is a guy with 2 powerful shotguns, but almost no way to deal damage at range, so his effectiveness goes down drastically outside of close range fights. This means Hanzo wants to shoot Reaper from far away. As you can see, your best effective range can be close range, medium range, or long range on the same hero, depending on your opponent. The skill of keeping the right distance at any point in a game is called spacing. Proper spacing requires a lot of game knowledge and critical thinking about how different heroes behave at different ranges. But you can already go a long way here by going into the practice range, picking a hero you don't normally play, and just seeing how they handle at varying distances. High ground is consistently one of the best positions you can be in for multiple reasons, some of which we already touched on. First, the ground acts as partial cover. When looking up at someone who has high ground, part of their hitbox is hidden behind the floor, which makes them harder to hit. Second, it gives you vision and information that you can use to take better angles and better engagements. Third, high ground is an automatic off angle. Even if you're right next to your team, you add another direction the enemy needs to pay attention to. This also makes it easier to shoot past the tanks and barriers directly at squishies, thereby negating a lot of the defensive resources tanks bring to the game. Fourth, gravity gives you options. You can stay up there or drop into either a more aggressive or more defensive position, but the other team can't chase you unless they walk a long route or expend mobility resources, which they now don't have to engage onto your team. Fifth, high ground makes headshots easier. Most heroes' heads are at the top of their character. When you look down on them, you see more of their hitbox, while your head hitbox is partially blocked by your body. This gives you a headshot advantage when shooting down. And sixth, many attacks deal splash damage that is easy to hit when shooting down, but can be impossible to hit shooting up when all you can hit are directs. What is an off angle? Most fights have a main line of conflict, with the tanks in front of each other and the teams behind their respective tanks. Taking an off angle means you leave this line and create another direction of attack. Off angles are strong because they negate enemy cover and manipulate the enemy's attention. You get more potential targets, including squishies that you otherwise wouldn't be able to attack. This also forces the enemy to expend resources to deal with you. You also generally take less damage while taking off angles because the enemy players by default look at the main direction of the fight. So by coming from a different direction, you have fewer people shooting at you, at least in the beginning, until they turn to you, at which point you're enabling your team by drawing pressure away from them. This is also the reason why constantly changing your angles is so powerful. Every time you peek from a new angle, you have a short time frame for creating uncontested pressure. You also constantly force the other team to look around so you don't surprise them, which means they can't pressure your team as much. If you're, for example, a DPS player and your tank isn't having a great game, try varying your angles. It might give your tank the breathing room to go in. We've actually already analyzed off angles in the previous game we looked at. At this point in the fight, there is a clear main line of conflict straight through the middle. The tanks are staring at each other, and almost everyone is on this line. The only person currently off angling is the defending Namor. He's on the high ground, taking an off angle where you can shoot the Namor or shoot the backline. So if you're in this situation, what are off angles you can take? Well, if you're a defender, you can obviously take the off angle Namor's taking right now. If you're down here, like let's say you're a tank, you can take a slight off angle and go over here and shoot the back line. Or you can take a slight off angle over here and shoot the back line or Namor. Or go up here and shoot whoever you want, like the back line or Namor, or the tanks if you're feeling fancy. If you're an attacker, then this is not an off angle. It is safe, you can use the wall for cover, but it's not an off angle. The high ground up here would obviously be an off angle, so you could go up here, contest the high ground, then shoot down at anyone you want, like the back line. Or you go over here and shoot the tanks who can't properly shield you and the rest of your team. Or, once your team is pushed up a bit more, you can go up here and shoot whoever you want, like the back line. Keep your options in mind. Look around for additional off angles you can take, and it's usually a good idea to change between off angles and not be in the same place at the same time, so that your enemies always have to contest with additional angles that they are being shot from. As a final topic on positioning, I want you to think about retreat options. You might be in a place that is fantastic as long as you can stay there, but how well can you leave when you take damage or get pushed? Can your supports already heal you? How quickly can you get back to your supports? What is the next cover when your current cover becomes untenable? Where's the next health pack? Let's play our last round of where can Namor go? What are his retreat options if he takes different positions? So where he is right now, he has a very simple retreat option. He can go to the left, hug the wall, take cover from all the enemies, and let his supports heal him up. Where he was before, he had a very simple retreat option, which is hug the wall, take cover from all the enemies who could hit him, and let his supports heal him up. And if he's feeling fancy, he can even take a health pack. If he's up here, his retreat options are either take cover behind the pillar, or drop back down and let his supports healing up, or take a health pack. If he takes a more aggressive off angle over here, his retreat options are a bit more lengthy, but he can always take a few steps back, use the ground as cover, and let his supports heal him up. Where he shouldn't be is here. And this is a position a lot of low-rank players would take, because he does have cover from the enemy here while his Strange is holding his shield up, but what if the Strange drops his shield, or his shield runs out and the enemy pushes Namor? Now he has nowhere to run to, because it takes a few seconds to get to any cover, and he has to rely on the supports to pump him with healing, which is not a position you want to be in. When you're in game, you usually see a timer ticking up or down, either in the form of objective progress or as an actual timer. Time is a resource for the attacking team. The attackers have a limited amount of time, and they want to make the most of that time to get as much objective progress as they can, while the defenders want to drain the time as much as possible. There are 3 ways of manipulating time that I want to discuss. The first one is stalling. Stalling means contesting the objective not with the intent to win the fight, but with the intent to waste time for the other team. Defenders can stall to give their own team the time to return for a proper team fight, or to give the attackers fewer team fights to try and push the objective. Let's look at our first example on objective progress again. Previously we discussed how keeping the objective from progressing during the team fight can get us more team fights. But this is not the only thing going on here. The attacking team has a set amount of time to push the cart as far as possible, and they want to spend as much of that time getting progress, regardless of whether or not there is a team fight going on in the background. The more time the cart spends idling in place, the less time they have to get the objective progress that they want. Every second shaved off the clock without them pushing is a second less they can spend on pushing. Here's an example of stalling with the intent to not just chafe off a few seconds from the enemy's clock, but to give my team the opportunity to come back and retake the point. The rest of my team just died, and I want to stall until they're back. But the last member of my team, in this case the cloak, will take 30 seconds to be back in the fight, and I can't survive that long 1v6. So instead, I decide to run away and give objective progress to the enemy team. I take a health pack, and I would have a bit more time up here because there's still objective progress that we can give the enemy team, but I see that the Cap, Magic, and Storm are pushing me, so I decide to go in. I pop ult for additional survivability, and my only goal here is to survive. And I survive long enough for the first members of my team to come back. And with the help of a few ults, we managed to actually turn the fight and retake the point. Trickling means that players take a fight where they are outnumbered, for example, alone against a full team, and die, rather than wait for their team. This wastes a lot of time because now their team needs to wait for them to respawn and return before they can get an even fight. Trickling is a mistake on the side of the trickling player and very common in lower ranks, though higher ranks are not immune to it either. To make that point, let's look at me being a noob again. We're in defense, we previously lost a team fight, and our supports are currently on their way back from spawn. All we need to do is wait until everyone's there and then do a full team fight. But instead, I decide to go in 1v6 to contest the cart, get stuck on the ceiling, and die. It is now 15:31. We could have had a full team fight right here, but because I fed, my team is now at a disadvantage for a whole 20 seconds, or in other words, a quarter of the remaining time that we had. And if my team hadn't clutched it, I'm back only now. If my team hadn't clutched it, there was a very high likelihood that we would have just lost the point right here. So in essence, don't go in alone, wait for your team, take a whole team fight, you'll win more games with it. Staggering is similar to trickling, but rather than the soon-to-be-dead player going in, the other team pushes for kills before their opponents are fully regrouped. Let's look at this example from a one above all game. These players include current and former pro players, so this is around the highest level of play you can get. Red team has captured the point, making them the defending team. This means blue team wants to push in. Shortly after the team fight begins, red team gets 2 kills. We're now at 3 minutes and 12 seconds. At this point, blue team runs away to regroup for the next team fight, and red team could let them by staying on the point, but instead, they hunt the retreating players and kill the Groot at 3 minutes and 18 seconds. This means by staggering Groot, red team gained ult charge from him and made it so blue team has to wait an additional 6 seconds to come back, which is free objective progress for red. 6 seconds doesn't sound like much, but at this level of play, every tiny advantage is heavily fought over. In your average lobbies, you can win a lot of time by identifying when you have an advantage over a player or a team, and then push and kill them. The last resource that I want to discuss, and one that is heavily underrated, is attention. We've actually already touched on this during our discussion of offer angles. As you've seen in this guide, there are a lot of things to keep track of and consider, and we've only discussed the fundamentals. Nobody has the mental capacity to keep track of everything. Attention dictates how well you can allocate the resources that you have, and manipulating your opponent's attention can take their resources away from places where those resources might be better used. And the most common way to do that is to make them look at you. Making enemy DPS look at you can give your team the breathing room to heal up or push in. Making enemy supports look at you can divert healing away from their teammates, leading to those teammates' death. The best instances of manipulating attention are when you get multiple enemy players to look at you and then live, because it means the rest of their team is effectively outnumbered. But even when enemy players don't directly look at you, making it more difficult for them to keep you in mind increases their mental load, which makes it more likely that they make mistakes. For a short but clear example, let's look at a different fight from the last game we watched. Now blue team has the point, and they are holding a narrow hallway that is difficult to get through. Iron Fist then decides to go in, ult 1v6 and die. You might say he fed, and I'm sure he would have preferred it not to die, but look at where his team is. The Iron Fist ult got every member of blue team to turn around and chase him. This took pretty much all the pressure away from his team, who got to walk through the hallway and got a trade on blue team's Hela just a few seconds later. In your average ranked games, you should be very careful not to die for drawing attention, because if your team only has 2 seconds to capitalize on the opening you create, chances are they won't. But you could, for example, go to the spot where Iron Fist came from with a hero with range damage like Hela, force them to look at you by shooting them, and then jiggle peek this cover for safety while your team pushes in. We've now discussed a lot of resources that you have at your disposal during your games. The whole point here is that you can use this to get favorable trades with your opponents. But they have the access to the same resources as you do, so how do you make trades go in your favor? There are broadly 3 ways to get favorable trades. The first is to have better mechanics. If you hit your shots and your opponent doesn't, then you have an advantage. This point is about as obvious as it is unhelpful. The second way is to maximize the resources you have before going into a fight. You get better positioning. You poke to get the remaining progress on your ultimate. You don't waste cooldowns, so you have them when the teamfight begins. All of the previous topics you can use to maximize your resource pool. The third way to get favorable trades is timing. This means you track your opponent's resources and take the trade when some of their resources are already spent or tied up somewhere else. Here are some common examples. You synchronize your engagements. Say you want to dive their backline. If you do that before the teamfight has begun, their team can point their entire attention and cooldowns at you. The likelihood that you get a good trade out of that is minimal, and it is better to wait until the teamfight begins so many of their team's resources are already tied up in it. You look for favorable matchups. Whichever hero you play, there will be heroes on the other team where a duel favors you, and heroes where the duel favors them. Think about where those heroes generally want to be on the map. Position yourself in a way that puts you closer to your favorable matchups and further away from your unfavorable matchups, and then look for a time window where you can take a duel without them getting help. You catch them out on rotations. We've discussed earlier how powerful positioning is, but usually players can't or don't want to stay in the same position all the time. This means they will go from one good position to another good position, and you can attack them during their transition period. And finally, attack them when they don't have cooldowns. Most heroes are difficult to kill if they have good positioning and all their cooldowns, unless they misplay. Think about which of their cooldowns can prevent you from killing them. Look for times where they use those cooldowns, either because you forced them or because they used it elsewhere, and then attack them before their cooldowns are back up. We've gone through a lot of topics here, so let's finish with 2 general tips on how to improve. First, focus on one thing at a time. Don't leave this guide thinking, I have 15 things that I want to improve now, because you'll get overwhelmed and not get anywhere. Pick one thing and focus on improving that before you move on to the next thing. And finally, always play with intent. This is the most important difference between good practice and bad practice. Don't play on autopilot. Decide what you want to do and then do it. Most of the game comes down to good decision making, and you can't practice your decision making if you don't make decisions. Play with intent, do something because you decide to do it, and pay attention on whether it was a good decision. A major skill that makes good players good is that during their play they can constantly say to themselves, that was a good decision, or that was a bad decision. You can learn and emulate that. Thank you very much to everyone who got this far, and I'll see you in game.